a hijacked airliner into the World Trade Center. But the Minneapolis investigation was so vigorously blocked that agents joked Osama bin Laden must have a mole at FBI headquarters. Once again, it was Michael Maltby, Marion Bowman, and David Frasca who played a role in the obstruction. All three had knowledge of the Phoenix memo at the time, yet none of them told anyone in the Minneapolis office about it prior to 9/11. In January of 2001, Chicago field agent Robert Wright saw his 3-year investigation of a terrorist cell abruptly halted. 3 months later, he wrote a stinging memo charging that the FBI was not interested in thwarting a terrorist attack, but instead, quote, was merely gathering intelligence so they would know who to arrest when a terrorist attack occurred, unquote. After 9/11, badly shaken, Wright wrote a 500-page book detailing his experience. But to this day, the FBI has blocked him from publishing it in full. Was Wright's terminated investigation related to the 199I order of January 2001? Working in the translation office of the FBI after 9/11, Sibel Edmonds discovered evidence of rampant internal corruption and criminal conspiracy to cover up advance information about 9/11. Placed under a gag order by the Justice Department, Edmonds has been denied the opportunity to tell her story in full, but she has courageously found ways to get word of her ordeal out to the public. She has joined with the 9/11 Truth Movement and has not wavered in her claims.
To become an American citizen, I took the citizenship oath. In taking this oath, I pledged that I would support and defend the Constitution and laws of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Therefore, not only do I have the right to challenge John Ashcroft's anti-Constitution and un-American actions, as an American citizen, I am required to do so. So are you.
The 9/11 Commission report fails to mention anything at all about Robert Wright. Sibel Edmonds and Colleen Rowley are each mentioned just once, in footnotes that reveal nothing about what they said. Also unmentioned in the report are David Frasca, Marion Bowman, and Michael Maltby, the officials who should rightly have to answer why these investigations were apparently blocked.
The set of documents known as the Northwoods documents or the Northwoods agreements or something to that effect, you featured them in your last book. Since we're talking a pretext for war, that certainly was a pretext for war in the early 60s. Can we speak about that for a moment?
The idea was to create a pretext to show that there was an attack by Cuba on the United States, and the idea was to have U.S. personnel from the CIA and other places secretly create terrorism in the United States. The documents actually said people would be shot on American streets, bombs would be blown up, and again, all this, the evidence would be laid to point the finger at Castro. One other idea was they were going to they had a very complex plan where they were going to take an aircraft and load it with CIA people that look like college students, fly it over to have it take off from an airport in Miami with a lot of publicity, and then it would quickly, after it got into the air, land at a secret CIA base. At that same time, an identical plane would take off from that CIA base, except this plane would be empty. And it'd be remotely piloted from the ground. It was a drone plane that would be very similar to the passenger plane that had just taken off. And once the plane was over Cuba, there was going to be a tape recorder that would have played a a distress call into a microphone saying help were being shot at, and a few minutes later, once the plane was over the Caribbean Sea after it passed over Cuba, it would have somebody would have pressed a button on the ground, blowing up the plane, and they would have blamed Cuba for killing a plane load of American college students. At another point, they had this idea where they were going to actually John Glenn was going to go into his first space mission around that same time, and part of the plan was that if Glenn's rocket accidentally blew up on liftoff, they were going to plant evidence making it look like that it was Cuban sabotage that blew it up. These were all outrageous plans. They made their way all the way up to Secretary of Defense McNamara. Actually, the plans were all signed by all members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and then they went up to McNamara, and McNamara rejected the plan, and that was the end of it. So it never got put into effect, but the fact that you can get all the members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the senior military officials in the U.S. government, signing off on a plan that outrageous is extraordinary to me.
Fast forward again to August 2nd, 1990. Iraq attacks Kuwait, claiming the Kuwaitis are slant drilling into Iraq's oil fields. U.S. President George Herbert Walker Bush pushes for a land war against Iraq, but polls show the U.S. public is split 50-50 on that idea. Then comes this eyewitness testimony before a congressional committee from a 15-year-old Kuwaiti girl. The claim is she cannot be identified for fear of reprisals.
While I was there, I saw the Iraqi soldiers come into the hospital with guns. They took the babies out of the incubators, took the incubators, and left the children to die on the cold floor.
The U.S. public is outraged. The result? Support for land war zooms. It's a turning point. Desert Storm is launched. 135,000 Iraqis are killed. An estimated 1 million Iraqis, many of them children and old people, then die as a result of 10 years of sanctions. One small problem. There never were any incubator baby deaths, not one. The Canadian Broadcasting Corporation's investigative flagship program, The Fifth Estate, reveals the girl to be the Kuwaiti ambassador's daughter, given her lines and coached in acting by the giant American PR firm Hill & Knowlton. It's one phase in a $10 million joint U.S.-Kuwaiti campaign of deception. This man is lying.
I myself buried 14 newborn babies that had been taken from their incubators.
This man is lying.
And they had kids in incubators, and they were thrown out of the incubators so that Kuwait could be systematically dismantled.
There were a lot of people who participated in a conspiracy. Yes, an out-and-out conspiracy of fake organizations, false documents, fraud, and disinformation. So, if a new man named Bush is in the White House and helps engineer a brazen deception in order to achieve global geopolitical goals, as well as domestic and personal ones, it wouldn't be a first, would it?
Hello again. What I did not tell you before was that in the course of my research, I discovered that Colin Powell was a habitual liar. In the run-up to Gulf War I, Colin Powell testified that he had satellite photos of 2,500 Iraqi tanks on the Saudi border ready to invade. A St. Petersburg Times reporter went to the Russians and bought a satellite photo of the area. Not one single tank. Years later, when questioned by reporters, Powell admitted there were no tanks, that in effect he had lied. And for those of you who do not remember, Colin Powell was the officer who covered up the My Lai massacre.